This is the Welsh Housing Quarterly political debate, and you've all been given a piece of paper, I hope by now, to show that there's a motion here. And the motion is, if you could only vote once in the next 18 months, which election would you vote in? The general election, 2015, or the Welsh Assembly election of 2016? Well, that's the motion. And I've been told that I've got to take a show of hands before the debate gets underway, and I will take in a show of hands after the debate has been taking place. So the first vote will start now. Hands up all those that regard the general election as more important. I hope somebody's counting these. Right, hands up all those that think the Assembly elections are more important. I would say that that's for the general election, just slightly.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Right, we'll come back to that a bit later. Now it's my task to introduce the panel to you. On my far right, actually, I don't know if that's significant, it's the Labour Party's representative here, Mike Edges, who is an Assembly member, used to be the leader of the Labour Party in Swansea, yep. But much more importantly, used to be a football referee. But I got the red cards in my pocket today, so any trouble, Mike, there we are. Next to Mike is an empty chair. That may well be for the UKIP member that turns up late, but certainly it counts for the Liberal Democrat who cannot be here today. They haven't sent a representative. It was supposed to be Peter Black, but he's on a committee. That's his excuse. But we won't know what their policies are because they won't be able to talk about it either. We may hear from UKIP a bit later, but certainly nobody from the Liberal Democrats. So, next to the empty chair is the leader of the Welsh Green Party, Pippa Bartolotti.
I vote.
And she's a candidate in Newport West. And she assures me that she's been kept going in this campaign by eating fruit and nuts. Now, make of you what you like.
And chocolate.
And chocolate. And chocolate. Next to Pippa is the Assembly member for Aberconwy, Janet Fitz-Saunders, and she represents the party and is their spokesperson on local government, is it?
Yeah.
And used to be the mayor of Llandudno at one time. That's your claim to fame. Any other claims to fame?
I'm a Welsh Conservative.
No, that's not a claim to fame. That's what your label is. And finally, I don't know if finally is the right word to use here, but is Martin Pollard, who represents Plaid Cymru and is trudging the seats of Cardiff Central at the moment. He's their candidate in Cardiff Central. So there we are. That's the panel. Now, they've got 3 or 4 minutes to make an opening statement. It's not really being conducted like proper debates in the telly. I won't cut them off in their prime, but if they do overstretch the mark, I will shut them down. Mike, would you like to start?
Oh, thank you, Gareth. First of all, so I'm very pleased to be here. My father was a member of the Institute of Housing for 40 years, and he'd be very proud of me now of actually coming to talk to this august organisation. First, I would hope people would vote twice, and then the following year in the council election. I think it's quite interesting that we've asked which was the most important in housing, the general election or the Assembly election. I wonder how many people would have put the council down as the most important, because in many areas it may well be. Housing is devolved to Wales, to the Welsh Assembly. I always say that with some trepidation, because I've seen how everything we think is fully devolved under the current settlement quite often appears that only part of it is devolved. And so it always comes with caveats. General election, it'll be about funding for housing, it'll be about funding for the National Assembly for Wales, and the Welsh Block Grant I used to say the Welsh Block Grant is the Welsh Block Grant. What I mean is it's the amount of money Wales is going to have to spend. And I think any increase or decrease in it will be set by Westminster. And whether we get the benefits of additional expenditure seems to be in the hands of the Treasury. Crossrail, we got the money for. High-speed rail links, we're not getting the money for. No rhyme or reason behind it, I know, but that's the way it is. But there's no right of appeal, and that's where we are. But the detailed housing policy is decided in Wales. Although there is pressure to fall in with key English-only initiatives, for example, the support for first-time buyers existed in England and was then copied into Wales. But the detailed housing policy is here in the National Assembly for Wales, where the housing is really perhaps at the top of the Welsh Government agenda. We had a housing bill last year, the Housing Bill 2014, and we've got the Renting Homes Bill 2015. Housing Bill was a huge piece of legislation. As I'm sure everybody in this room knows, I supported the bills throughout, and I'm nature an optimist, and I'll highlight some what I think are the main benefits of the bill. We've seen changes in housing, as you're all aware. There's been a huge growth in the private rented sector, a decrease in number of houses run by councils, owned by councils, and a slight increase in housing associations. The 2014 bill means that all private landlords and letting agents are forced to register, and it also means that they have to pass the fit and proper person test, and this means for the first time ever tenants have confidence in their landlords. I was a great supporter of registration, and as the number increases, then it's inevitable that we need to keep on top of private landlords and have controls, and that is what the current bill making its way through is doing. Homelessness, council have got a duty now, and thankfully, to deal with people who are about to become homeless. One of the great weaknesses of the old system, as most of you here know, was the council people came and had to declare themselves homeless to be helped. And sometimes action before they were declared homeless could very well have given you a means of stopping that happening. It requires local authorities to offer meaningful and early assistance. It is also in the bill dealing with gypsy traveller sites. It promotes housing cooperatives, which, if I had 20 minutes, I'd talk to you in great detail about, because we in Wales are missing a trick onto housing cooperatives compared to the rest of Europe. It allows councils discretion to charge additional council tax for empty homes, and we've also had Empty Homes Action. The number of empty homes in Wales at the moment is an absolute disgrace, and we need to get them back into use. It allows a council tax premium on second homes, which I believe will do an awful lot of good. The Renting Homes Bill is now making its way through, and that's where Peter Black is this morning and where Janet Finch-Saunders and I were earlier today. And that, again, is a huge piece of legislation. What I'm trying to say is, for money, it's Westminster, but for the detailed legal position and changes to the way that housing is run in Wales, it's the Assembly which does it.
Thank you, Mike. I won't ask Peter to comment on that, because he's not here, and of course UKIP would regard Europe as the most important one, of course. Pippa.
Okay, you've only got one vote, and I maintain you should vote in this election, and there are two main reasons why. The first is that austerity, which has failed on its own terms, I mean, the deficit has not been obliterated, it has in fact grown. Austerity is wrong on every level. It has made us less equal. It has increased the health issues and the crime issues that the country has. It has made us a poorer country unless you happen to be in the top 1%. So austerity is wrong, and the only way you're going to vote out austerity is if you vote for an anti-austerity party in this election. Now, the Greens have a fully costed manifesto, and we show you what needs to be done and how it will be paid for. It all can be paid for. There is not a shortage of money, there is a shortage of political will. So Wales gets some money from England, from Westminster, and in an austerity budget, we will get even less, maybe 12 billion less. And I don't know what they're going to cut, but that's a lot of money from services that have already had far too many cuts. They certainly aren't saying they're going to cut the bedroom tax, for example, which should have been abolished immediately. It didn't work. It causes much too much pain and suffering for the millions of people at the lowest end of the wage and income scale. Welfare reform has also failed. But let's think about the other reason why you should be voting in this election. We have an unfair political system. First past the post is not representative. So let's think about what we could do to change the system, because you can believe me that Tories and Labour aren't going to change it on their own. So if you vote for one of the smaller parties, and hopefully an anti-austerity party like the Greens, if millions more across the UK vote for the smaller parties, and yet they get hardly more than a handful of MPs, that will show this horrible first-past-the-post system for what it really is. What we need is true proportional representation, and your vote at this election can make it happen so that all other elections in the future are fairer.
Yeah.
Thank you. Choose elect, and I do most of my speaking standing up. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And what an interesting question as to whether if you had just the one vote. Well, luckily, in this country, you do have the two votes. And I hope that I'm here today to convince you how important the vote a week today is, but equally so, how very important the vote is for the Assembly elections. It is fair to say there is so much confusion across Wales as to the role of the Assembly, the role of the Welsh Government, and how the UK Government and its policies impact. For those of you who don't know me, Gareth has kindly introduced me. I am the Assembly Member for Aberconwy, and I'm proud to represent the Welsh Conservatives. I was elected in 2011. Prior to that, I served for many years in local government at Town Council and County Council level. I've been a Cabinet Member on Conway County Borough Council, Chair of the Principal Scrutiny Committee, because I was the leader of the largest group therein. Now, at the National Assembly, I am an appointed member of the Health and Social Care Committee and the CELG Committee, which is the Communities, Equalities and Local Government. As an Assembly member, it is certainly great to see the distinction between the general election and National Assembly election made in the title of this debate, because there needs to be a lot more debates in the next 12 months, again, to instil in people the need, especially with regards to housing, as to why it really is important to vote in an Assembly election. 43% of the Welsh electorate think our NHS is run from Westminster, and yet it is 15 years since powers were devolved here in Wales. So if I turn to the question, which election do I think you should vote in, if your top priorities are security, foreign affairs, banking, tax, then yes, you would vote in the general election if you only had the one vote. However, if, like the majority of people I speak to out on the doorstep, your priorities are concerns such as health, education, transport, the economy, and today in particular, housing, then I would certainly again urge you to vote in next year's Assembly election. Currently, the UK Government is working really hard. It sends its money over. How the Welsh Labour Government spend it is down to their own priorities. But we do need a strong Welsh Government that has the ability to spend the money coming in responsibly for the good of the Welsh people, no matter their age, gender, or which part of Wales they choose to live in. And that money has to be spent transparently, with full democratic accountability. And that is lacking in a lot of public money that is spent in Wales. Now, let's take housing policy as an example why I believe this to be the case. My role as Shadow Minister and membership of the CELG Committee means that I'm actually sitting scrutinising legislation as it's coming through. I was part of the scrutiny committee for the housing bill, and as Mike has already mentioned, prior to coming here today, I've been not just scrutinising but contributing to the formation of the Renting Homes Wales bill. When the Conservative Party had control over housing here, 9,937 houses were built each year. And during the last 3 terms of the Welsh Assembly, Labour has cut the number of new social homes by 71%. And now just 5,834 new homes per year are being delivered for Wales. That now means we have 90,000 households lingering on Welsh waiting lists. And I can tell you as an Assembly member, apart from health, because that is a very serious issue, and we know of the problems facing us in Wales, housing is my other main casework matter. And I know there are people in the audience here today who run housing associations who I interact with on a daily basis on behalf of someone who is desperately in need. I'll come back later to Pippa's point about the so-called bedroom tax, which isn't a tax, the spare room subsidy, and you know, some effective points in relation to that. We would rejuvenate the right to buy. That is a very strong foundation policy, and I make no apologies for that. We know that previously under Margaret Thatcher, that policy would be that would bring you in the much-needed funds. If you sold a house, you built 3. Did it happen? Well, we have several people, thousands of people across the UK now, who are proud homeowners as a result of that policy. However, in some instances, local authorities didn't actually spend always on that, and I am so proud of our new policy on the right to buy that will actually see a new house built for everyone sold. And if local authorities do not play the game and reinvest that money into new housing stock, then that money will be taken away from the local authorities. Got much more to tell you about our policies as the debate continues. Anyway, Joch yn fawr iawn.
And finally, Martin.
Yes, thanks very much, Bore da bawb. And in terms of the question that was asked, which election would you vote in if you could only have one vote? Well, on the basis of the audience we have here, and I'm sure the topics you've been discussing, I'd tentatively say next year's Assembly elections, on the basis that, as Mike said, housing is a largely devolved issue to the National Assembly for Wales. That said, this election next Thursday is incredibly important in terms of ensuring that the block grant that the Assembly government gets from Westminster is sufficient to meet the needs of Wales. And that whole relationship between London and Cardiff is something that Plaid Cymru has particularly been focusing on. In the aftermath of the Scottish referendum last year, the London parties enabled Scotland to keep a deal under the Barnett formula, which sees Scotland comparatively funded £1.2 billion a year better than Wales. That 1.2 billion, if you look at other areas, is enough, for example, to employ 52,000 nurses or build 33 secondary schools every year. So we've been arguing strongly that there is no justification for parties in Wales to not be holding the Westminster government to account and asking why we shouldn't have that same funding deal as Scotland. So that is why the Westminster election is particularly important. Now, some of the issues relating to housing are also relevant to, of course, the next week's elections. Amongst Plaid Cymru's policies, we do want to end the bedroom tax, the spare room subsidy, almost an Orwellian euphemism used by the coalition government to describe something which is really hitting the poorest, most vulnerable people in society the hardest and is forcing people to go to food banks, should be ended straight away. We would also want to see, for example, a cut in VAT on certified house repairs. But in particular, it's this issue of funding for infrastructure. Plaid Cymru wants to see a gradual increase in government department spending over the next 5 years, and we want to see an extra 1% of GDP spent on infrastructure so that we can ensure that more of these investments can be made. And it's astonishing to me that the Welsh Government under Labour is considering spending the entire, likely to be the entire of the additional borrowing powers of the Welsh Government on a stretch of the M4, when there could be other things they could be doing, and they could be spending, they could be working on a cheaper version of that plan. So within the devolved areas of housing, we believe that we need to have a Build for Wales infrastructure scheme, which would include the obvious things like schools and hospitals, but could be extended to house building, where there's a government-funded scheme that any profits from that can be ploughed back into into further infrastructure spending, as opposed to the PFI scheme. With other devolved things, I mean, we've already had some success in ensuring that Welsh local authorities who still own their own housing stock are able to plough the rent back into maintaining, improving and building more social housing. We want to see that continue. We'd like to see an extension of the Help to Buy Wales scheme, increased conversion of empty properties. And finally, one very important thing for us is to look at the private rental sector as well. And I think I'm the first of the candidates to mention the importance of young people being able to have decent housing in the market that we're operating in at the moment. So Plaid Cymru wants to introduce rent controls, or rather reintroduce rent controls, to take into account the fact that in the last year alone, private rentals have risen by 5.2% in costs. The amount of housing benefit paid out in Wales has doubled in the last decade alone. So we want to ensure that young people are not priced out of the market, whether it's purchasing or renting a home. And we want to ensure, of course, that there's a fair return to long-term landlords who properly maintain their properties, but to ensure that there is a bit of a rebalancing of rights between tenants and landlords. So overall, I want to say that we're committed in Plaid Cymru to enabling people to have a better quality of life in Wales, and in particular when we're looking at young people, to ensuring more that of our talented young people are able to stay in Wales in decent quality accommodation long term. Thank you.
Right, we've had an opening statement from each one of the parties. The floor is open to questions, comments, challenges from you. And if nobody wants to say anything, I'll take the opportunity to ask questions myself. Yep.
Do you think that introducing stricter rental caps or controls on rental charges will actually be a disincentive for developers to build new houses?
It's a very difficult one. I mean, as I say, it's a question of balancing rights. And I think that rents are rising already anyway at substantial levels. So it's not a case of the rental market having stalled. The rental market is doing incredibly well, and but it's the landlords primarily who are benefiting. We want to incentivise landlords, of course, to continue to develop new properties and ensure that people can get rental properties available. But the point is that with rent controls, they are a tried and tested policy. I raised this point at a previous hustings where I was criticised of going back to socialist policies of the 1970s or something. But interestingly, rent controls have been very successful in New York, which is the global capital of capitalism, and so it is possible to do it, but it has to be obviously targeted in an effective way. It has to be locally adjusted according to levels of council tax to ensure that we're not capping it at some level that disincentivises.
Before I go to Mike at the far end, then Janet, I'm going to say, rent controls, is this a step in the right direction?
Clearly, we hear very often much criticism of the private sector when it comes to housing in general. You have to remember across Wales that there's over 50% of the properties that are on the rental market are private landlords. And it may just be that somebody has one particular property. For me, the problem with rent controls is a disincentive in terms of for a landlord to be able to reinvest in their stock, they would then need to actually have the correct rents coming in. And whilst you say that the rents have gone up, certainly in Aberconwy, rents have stayed fairly stable for a good few years. As far as I'm concerned, it's about making sure we've got good quality housing stock. We need government help in doing that also, and we need to ensure that there are more houses built. Under Labour, despite all their cries now about the spare room subsidy, the fact is that they simply did not build the houses. For me, it's about making sure that the rent in homes bill that's going through at the moment, the condition of a property only has to be, you know, human habitation. There's no standards being applied to the rental homes bill as to the quality of the housing. So even in rental or private sector, why can you have it where some can be very good property, some can be actually property that is only just habitable? Is that what we aspire to in Wales? That we have tenants actually just living in properties that are just habitable? Rent controls will not work. It will be a disincentive, and I believe that people in the industry themselves are saying that rent controls will not work.
Well, it's the main policy of Mr Miliband. He wants to freeze rents for 3 years. He wants to bring about control. Isn't it going back to the 70s? Did it work then, did it?
It did work then, didn't it? But can I just make three points? I think that one of the big problems is we've had a shortage of public housing, either housing association or council housing. The sale off of council stock means that people are being forced into the private sector who would prefer to be living in either housing association or council housing and paying substantially less. And it annoys me, I'll go further than that, it makes me angry when I see in some of the housing estates in my constituency that you've got houses for old council estates up for rent at 2 to 3 times as much as the council charges rent for them. It's also, I mean, privately rented accommodation. Some of these landlords are making substantial sums of money. In my constituency, you can buy a house for £50,000 or £60,000. You can rent it out for £500 a month. You get a 10% rate of return, and some of these properties are not very well maintained. I think rent controls are incredibly important, but the real thing is more public housing. Public housing is the only way of getting out of this. And if in 1945, and with all the debts after the Second World War, we were able to engage in a substantial council house building programme, I do not see why we cannot do it now. Maybe a little off message on that last statement, but personally I am committed to the continuation, to building more council houses. I'm very pleased in Wales, a number of local authorities, mainly Labour, have now set about building council houses once again.
Before I ask Pippa to come in and make a comment, does the questioner want to come back on anything that's said so far? No? Okay. Pippa.
Right. None of these governments have built us enough houses. That's why we're in a pickle now. We've got people living in substandard housing, which is being overpriced, and we've got a lot of landlords getting mortgage rate relief interest, making quite a lot of money out of renting property. And I don't mind people doing this for a business, but I don't like it that they put forward substandard housing at very high rates. So a rent cap is a very useful tool. It works in cities right across Europe, and it will work here. And I want to say a word about right to buy as well, because, you know, I was talking to a lady not far from me in Malpas in Newport, and she had bought her council house, and she looked across the road to one that had not been built, and it was all being beautifully insulated and having a complete revamp. And she said, I thought I did the right thing buying my house, but we could never afford to insulate it in the way that the council has. So right to buy isn't a really good tool. It has starved areas of social housing, much needed social housing. You know, we've got people on waiting lists for one-bedroom flats who are on the one hand being penalised for the bedroom tax, and on the other hand there isn't a one-bedroom place for them to move into. It's astoundingly bad.
Give me an opportunity.
So we have to introduce some compassion into the policies that we're putting out here. It's no good just thinking about the profit element, because, as I have said before, when money is God, ethics and morality become unaffordable. So let's think about each other. We share our towns and cities with people who are rich and poor. It is our duty as humans, as individuals, to make sure that society is not too unequal, but to also allow those who want to use property as a business to be able to do that fairly. But I will just add a slight rider to that, because profiteering in any business is not seen as a great progressive way forward for Greens. We love profit, we love small businesses. After all, they are going to be the backbone of the economy that we will see.
I think that we've had enough on that now. We're drifting a bit here. Janet, you are getting a big subsidy in from the state to these private landlords. Surely that's not good Conservative policy, or is it?
It's not. I didn't say it was Conservative policy. At the end of the day, there are people who aspire to own their own home, and there are people who, you know, are obviously in rented accommodation. For me, it's about having choice, and it's also about the fact that we've had Labour in power here in Wales, propped up by Plaid Cymru, propped up by the Lib Dems at times. There's never been a Conservative government running in the National Assembly for Wales, sadly. As far as I am concerned, we talk about the spare room subsidy, and you mentioned, Pippa, with all due respect, a one-bedroom flat being penalised under the bedroom tax, as you call it. Well, a one-bedroom flat, if there's somebody living in it, I can't see how you can be. What the bedroom...
No, I didn't say that. I said there are people who are having to pay the bedroom tax whilst they are waiting for a one-bedroom flat to be built. In other words, they can't get out of the trap. There's nowhere to move.
And I agree with you. We do need far more one- and two-bedroomed units. But as far as I'm concerned, certainly when I'm working my own constituency, experience teaches me that we get people in who are a single person living in a 3-4 bedroom home that they frankly can't afford, and they need incentive, they need support to actually help them to move into something smaller that they can afford. I have families in my constituency actually crying out for 2- and 3-bedroomed properties. I have cases where mother and baby have to sleep on the settee in the homes with their parents because they can't. We need family units, we need small units. The fact remains in Wales, it is the fault of the Welsh Labour government. They've had 15 years to build the houses and they haven't. And certainly in the UK, under the Conservatives, we would have a housing commission. We would have a champion actually responsible and accountable for making sure that the right numbers of houses were built. Take the empty...
But the truth is, there hasn't been enough house built in either England or Wales, hasn't it? It's a failure of all of you, isn't it? Martin?
Well, Janet just said there aren't enough 1- and 2-bedroom houses being built, and the Conservative solution to that is to put in place this incredibly unfair tax which forces people to move even if they can't, or forces them to consider moving even if they can't, or indeed if there isn't a property anywhere in their area that they can move to. There have been numerous stories of people being forced to up sticks and move their family to an area or even a town where they don't even know anybody to transform their whole life in order to pay this so-called subsidy. And I think, you know, this is a classic example of something which affects the most vulnerable people in society the most.
Can I just come back quickly?
Wait, no, I think we've got another questioner now. Could we go to the next questioner, please?
Is this working? We managed to hear from the 3 of the parties their view of the Housing Wales Act when it went through scrutiny. So I just wondered whether Pippa Bartolotti could explain to us what the Greens' responses to consultation documents and what their view of the Housing Wales Act was through the process of making the piece of legislation.
Direct question to you.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, the scrutiny of the housing bill, I mean, it's very difficult for us because we don't see it before it goes through. It's not often, you know, the machinations of studying these documents aren't available to me outside of government.
They are.
But what I would say is that there are very many fine words in these documents, but they're not followed up by fine actions. We have an appalling state of housing stock. We have very good schemes to put in insulation and to upgrade them. But I would also say that one thing that seems to be lacking is the standard of building for new houses. We should be building to a passive house standard. We should be building homes that are so cheap to heat. We should be abandoning fuel poverty in all our future house builds. There is enormous work being done across the world on building standards. I feel that in Wales and in the UK we have fallen behind. There are any amount of excuses that count, but really, I have a son who lives in Freiburg in southwest Germany, where, for example, all houses are built with their main roof facing south. They don't have roofs, they have solar panels. I've been in houses where all you need when it's minus 10 degrees is to light a candle for some extra warmth. They are so well insulated. Now, these aren't fancy houses. These are houses built by housing cooperatives. So we need to open the way to the people to build their own structures. We need to stop this banking of land, which prevents a lot of people building their own structures. And we need to bring old, decrepit housing up to a decent standard.
Pippa, that wasn't the question. Mike?
Well, as everybody, I think, in this room knows, every piece of the legislation is published initially as a bill, and that is available to everybody in the world, actually, because it's on the internet. The discussions that take place, as those this morning have been taking place, are available to anybody who wishes to tune in to Senedd TV, which perhaps doesn't top the ratings quite as much as Coronation Street. And also, we talk about housing in poor quality housing. The housing areas such as Havard in Swansea, the housing renovation has gone on there. The whole area of 19th century properties has been renovated. That's substantial progress made by a caring Labour government.
The problem that we have, though, again, is that, you know, there is still in Wales a hell of a lot of property that's inadequate for people to live in. And Pippa is right in that sense, isn't she?
We do have some, but I know within the audience...
Some? Quite a lot?
Let me finish, Gareth. I tell you now, I was involved as a councillor with the housing stock transfer in Aberconway, or Conway County Borough Council. There are two of the housing associations, I believe, in the audience today, Cartrefi Conway, North Wales Housing. I'm very proud to work along these organisations. They provide fantastic houses, and the quality, the Welsh Housing Quality Standard was applied very early on. They're getting around as many properties as they can, and I work with them very positively, very consistently. So let's not actually bring the quality of our housing. We have, in the private sector, we do have landlords who own hundreds of properties, and they're not necessarily people residing in Wales. You can go to auctions in London and buy properties, and as you've rightly pointed out, Mike, you can buy a property cheap and then put tenants into it. So then it's down to enforcement, but let us not get away from the fact that across Wales, where housing stock transfer has been applied, it's working. It's certainly working in my constituency, and I'm really proud to work alongside these guys and girls in this industry.
So the Welsh Government have got it right in one sense, then?
No, the Welsh Labour Government have got it wrong. We have got thousands, in my own constituency, over 2,000 empty properties, with over 1,000 of those properties being empty for more than 12 months. I asked the Minister, the Welsh Labour Minister, to set targets. Now, he set a target of 5,000 a year, bringing them back. Some councils are brilliant at doing that, and they're actually pulling their weight in doing it. Other authorities are just waving at the minister saying, no. The point being, what is wrong? Anyone in this audience, tell me, what is wrong with bringing good quality, well-built housing stock back into use? Yes, we do need to build more, definitely need to build more, but it needs more than one approach. You need to bring, I can take you to places in Aberconway even, where there are rows and rows of houses.
Right, I think we've drifted a bit from the question now. We're drifting a bit from the question now. Martin, the question?
Which question, sorry?
Well, the question was, are people that are not involved in politics, like the Green Party, able to contribute to consultation documents?
Well, yeah,
they're all public.
They are, but of course, the parties which are in government have the biggest role in drafting those legislation. But yeah, clearly there is a role for all those who are interested in specific bits of legislation to have their say when they're out for consultation.
Okay, another set of questions. Did I see someone with their hand up? I think I did. Over there.
Martin Little from Merthyr Tydfil Housing Association. Having listened to some of the comments of the candidates this morning, makes me wonder, why should we believe them? Because I mean to say, they don't live in the real world. If they did, they'd have a whole different outlook on life. Because let me tell you, they're telling us we can do this and that, we can save, and we can do the various things to help ourselves. But I tell you what, them in their ivory mansions, not living in the real world, it'll do them good to take all their money away from them and come down and live like a lot of the people are living down here and see how they manage. I tell you what, they wouldn't last a month.
There we are. So, politicians are not living in the real world. Are you living in the real world, Mike?
Well, I speak as somebody who was born in a privately rented house with an outdoor toilet and a tin bath, who spent the next 20 to 25 years of my life living in a council house, who currently lives in a 3-bedroom semi in Morriston on the outskirts of Swansea. Living alongside me is somebody who works as a drayman, and the other side is somebody who works in the council dealing with housing benefits. You may not like what I say, you may not like me, but don't accuse me of not living in the real world. And tonight I'll be taking part in a quiz in a local pub. So I live in the real world. You might not like what I say, but don't accuse me of not living in the real world. I'm out there meeting with people who are far more ordinary than this audience is today.
Well, are you living in the real world?
Well, I certainly don't live in a mansion, and I do believe that hard work helps you to aspire and achieve, and you need ambition to do that, and I believe that the Conservatives does that. But at the end of the day, I also agree with what you say. You clearly live where you feel that some of the housing stock maybe isn't to a good standard, but then you need to then sort of work with your local authority and ensure that the Welsh Labour government pull their end of the bargain. The Welsh Housing Quality Standard keeps getting put back by the Welsh Labour government. How are we going to get all our stock back up into, I wouldn't want to live in a house that is just safe for human habitation. We all want to aspire to live to the Welsh Housing Quality Standard. I say let's get on with it, and it takes us all working in partnership, because we've seen how local government now are struggling with enforcement powers that they have. You can actually enforce against a landlord, and if they're not bringing their property back into good condition, you can enforce. But local authorities now, as the bills are going through, the housing bill, the renting homes bill, only today, the one thing that's highlighted is the cuts to the local authority budgets by the Welsh Labour government are going to make it very difficult for the environmental health departments and the housing teams to actually, you're having the rug pulled from under you. So you're quite right to say that people say one thing and do another. the Conservative Party, both in the UK and Welsh Conservatives, genuinely believe in not only will building houses and having more confidence in the construction industry get the economy growing and going in Wales, but it will actually incentivise people and empower people to have a home of their own, be that rented, social or owned themselves.
But the problem is, and perhaps we'll ask for a comment from the other two, is at the end of the day, it comes down to cash. And if the government, both the opposition and the government themselves saying that they're going through a period of austerity, that money isn't going to be there, is it? Martin?
Well, I agree. And just on the gentleman's original question, I too don't live in a mansion. I live in the Pentwyn area of Cardiff in a fairly sort of normal house in Cardiff. But and I'm also not a politician yet, by the way. But
but you will be, of course.
Well, indeed, as of next Thursday, yeah. The austerity agenda for me is the key here. You know, we are living in one of the few developed countries in the Western world which has an increasing gap between rich and poor. Many of the policies pursued in the last 5 years have particularly been a problem for women and for the most vulnerable people in society, and we need to change that. And that's why Plaid Cymru is arguing for a higher investment in infrastructure, for an increase in government spending, on the basis that there are studies that show for every £1 that you invest in infrastructure, there's a £3 return for the economy. We need to do things in a different way.
Pippa, are you living in the real world?
Well, yes, I live on a pension, actually, I'm waiting for the voters to make an honest woman of me. So, yeah, it's up to you guys. Yeah, I live in the real world. My friends all live in the real world. I left school at 15. I went to art college. I've scrimped and saved and done up my own houses and done all sorts of things in life, and I continue to do my own decorating, and in fact I make most of my own clothes as well. So yeah, I'm in the real world, but the real world is, you know, it's okay for me. I'm not badly off, I'm not complaining, but for some it's awful, and the trouble with the poverty trap is that you can't afford to get out of it. So if you just squash people more and more into a trap, you're making lives unbearable, and we have another generation coming up, born into austerity, and for them, I really worry, with the education cuts, with university tuition fees, with the prices of houses and the shortage of houses, I feel that we are dealing them a bum hand, to be perfectly honest, and I'd like to do something about that.
The one thing I can do is bring a meeting to an end. We've gone through our allotted time slot. It's time for me to call for a second vote now. And the second vote is, has this panel changed your mind? Hands up first. Is Westminster and the general election more important than the Assembly election? The general election first, hands up. Hands up now for the Assembly election. This panel clearly has swayed you with their rhetoric. Thank you very much, and thank you, the panel.
Thank you very much.